From Sudan to the Sahel, security has hit its crescendo and it has hit the nadir. From every part of that continent, whether it is in Ethiopia with the Tigrayans, whether it is in Mozambique, in the Cabo Delgado region, or Nigeria's northeast region, and even in Cameroon, in the southwestern part of that country, everything seems to be falling apart. Just as one has been fixed, another one rears its head. On VSA today, we'll be looking at security. Welcome. Well, these are precarious times in the African continent as death and quite a number of other issues, displacement reign supreme in various countries. The Central African Republic, the Sahel 5, Ethiopia, Sudan, Tunisia, are all battling issues of insecurity stemming from a cocktail of factors. Now, politics, ethnicity, religion, regional bias, and many other problems have given birth to one of the most pressuring times on the continent since the turn of the 21st century. Now, Central African Republic, after more than 60,000 people were displaced and thousands others were killed between December and January in the C.A.R., a 15-day state of emergency has been declared, believed to be politically motivated and fueled by regional bias. Rebels in the north of the country are killing locals. Cattle have been rustled as the rebels usually are in a hot pursuit of beef. Central Africans have taken refuge in Cameroon, DR Congo, and other countries, trekking thousands of kilometers seeking protection from flying bullets and hunger. Now, 2.8 million Central Africans need humanitarian assistance, and that's why we say on Village Square today, we'll be looking at how Africa can get out of this big mess. Joining me today, Commodore Abimbola Ayuba and Kabir Adamu are two security experts of repute. Gentlemen, it's good to see you again on the show. We're starting with retired Commodore Abimbola Ayuba.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. It's our first time doing this for the year. You know, so many problems, just the way we highlighted the tail end of 2020 with the insecurity of lives and properties up there among them. What's the genesis of these problems? Because from one country to the other, from the Sahel, the Sudan, even in Nigeria, there are pockets of violence and insecurity concerns.
Thank you very much, Sulai. You are very correct. But some of the key factors are the failure of political leadership in most African countries, deep-rooted structural crisis of development, which creates conditions for poverty, unemployment, social inequalities, which also the mass effect of these are frustrations, alienation, discontentment, which spark violence and insecurity. And specifically, the struggle for state-owned, the struggle for control of state-owned resources, like you earlier mentioned, ethno-religious intolerances, as well as the impact of cross-cultural affinities of African societies.
Now, if you look at it critically, it looks to me that sometimes politics can't be taken out of this. And of course, as you also highlighted, you know, the desire for natural resources in some of these places have actually put them in a big, you know, security challenge. Now, let's take them one at a time and look at, for instance, what we have seen in, you know, on the fringes, especially before we get into Nigeria. Would you say what these countries are dealing with would have been better handled by, you know, the leaders of the continent?
Yes, precisely. So like if you look at the countries that bind Nigeria, Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, you will observe that most of these countries are either having failing or actually failed governments. And this has led to a lot of vacuum in both space dominance and also in political leadership, and leaving so many free spaces for uncontrolled armed groups to infiltrate from even beyond the immediate countries that surround Nigeria, like Mali, like Sudan, and of course from the Horn of Africa. These are critical issues that need quick resolution by the political leaders that actually surround us, and that.
Let me bring in Kabir Adamu here. Again, apologies that I think we experienced some kind of glitch on the audio quality coming in from our connection with retired Commodore Ayuba. Now, Kabir Adamu, good to have you join us again on the program. The thing here is that Africans are worried now because there's virtually, from the Sudan to the Sahel, you have pockets of, insecurity, to deal with. Now, the Sahel, comprising 5 African countries, is also troubled, with more than 2 million people already displaced. So, Kabir, can you give us a breakdown of what's happening in the region?
Just like my co-discussant has mentioned, it's the principal reason and the foremost of all the reasons is governance. Virtually all the countries in the Sahel region are suffering from this poor governance. And that is why in almost all the statistics that are released by different multilateral or bilateral bodies across the world, you find out that the Sahelian countries come topmost in terms of human index. By this, I mean the lowest ebb in terms of education, in terms of their economic well-being. Name them, they are at the bottom of this statistics. And so you have a situation where the majority of the populace in these countries are deprived economically. They feel the poverty level is extremely high, education level is very, very low. And so it's very easy for these non-state actors or organized criminal groups to recruit them and use them for whatever objectives. And this can include terrorist groups too from around the region. Now, this has not been helped by climate change. So that's the second reason beyond governance. Climate change too has come with its own vagaries. The Sahara is expanding rapidly. If you look at Nigeria as an example, at least the part of Nigeria that is within the Sahel, in the northeast, if we look at the Lake Chad Basin, how it has receded and the impact that has had on the people of the Lake Chad Basin, in particular in Borno State, then Niger to an extent, Chad as well, and how that is also feeding into the ability of the terrorist groups to recruit from these persons. And then I also want to mention weapons proliferation from across the continent, especially from Libya after the collapse of the Gaddafi administration, and how the civil war that broke out in that country led to the proliferation, as it were, of small arms and light weapons across the entire Sahelian region. So you now have a mix, as it were, a potpourri of violence. Some would even call it a cesspool of violence that can easily be ignited. And that is why you saw the coup in Libya. In Nigeria, you are seeing protests here and there. You are seeing, non-state actors such as Boko Haram and the other terrorist groups recruiting from this pool of depraved and, poverty-inclined residents, unfortunately.
Well, I think, gentlemen, both of you have just been able to lay it all out, touched on quite a number of issues, also, bringing the perspective of light and small arms on the continent, which has actually crept into so many other parts of the continent from Libya. in all of this, the role of politics and citizen engagement is key here, isn't it?
Exactly. We focused on governance as the predominant factor. Now, governance would have created, especially a democratic government, that would have created an inclusive society where every member of the society feels he's being carried along. But unfortunately, the reverse is the case in majority of the Sahelian countries. Which one should we pick? Is it Mali? Is it Niger? Is it Chad? Or even to an extent Nigeria? All of these countries, unfortunately, have this situation where a significant population are feeling marginalized. They are crying that they are not included. And so that social balance that would have created the environment for good, systems to float is not there. And you have what I would call centrifugal forces that are now tearing at the society to exact their pound of flesh from this lack of inclusion by government, as it were. And honestly, that's the same thing virtually in all the Sahelian countries. And no matter how we go and come back, we'll still come back to the point, it's about governance and inability of the government in those countries to practice the kind of democratic tenets that they, at least saying that they've embraced.
Let me bring in Commodore Ayuba on this. Armed conflict has become a big problem in Africa, and you wonder where these sophisticated weapons are gotten. Good thing that Kabir has, told us where some of them crept in. IS, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, they all have a strong presence now on the continent. Could there be more splinter groups, Commodore Ayuba?
Certainly. Let me answer the first part of the question. Africa is a low producer of small arms and light weapons, accounting for less than 3% of the global production. Yet, over 70% of illicit weapons are found in the African region. So what are the sources of these weapons are primarily due to arms releases from the old Soviet states. And of course, there are so many wars that have happened in the West Africa and some Central Africa. And all these arms releases find a way of being smuggled into newer conflict areas, especially the Horn of Africa, Somalia, and Somaliland. And of course, the presence of uncontrolled armed groups signify the frustration of some of these people who feel cheated, feel deprived of the benefits of governance and forced by greedy politicians and their quest to cling to power almost eternally. And of course, for instance, if you look at the presence of ISIS are playing groups like
I think we're also experiencing another glitch there. We hope to really. Commodore Ayuba, we'll get back to you as soon as we get a seamless connection to you. Let me bring in Kabir Adamu and listening to Commodore Ayuba, at least one already have a sense of where we're headed and what the continent is dealing with. But again, run us through, if you will, the factors that influence the presence of international forces in Africa.
Our colonial history is the most important factor here. Most of these countries, particularly France and to an extent Britain, have ties with their former colonies. And so they also have interest, and sometimes the desire to protect those interests, as well as protect the political structures that they have left in place has now mean that they would deploy their troops. And so you have France, which has Operation Barkhane.
You know, one of those days sometimes you have it. And again, it is at this point, we'll take a moment. Keep in mind that today on the show, we're looking at the security situation from across the continent, as we have seen from Sudan to the Sahel, whether it is in the Cabo Delgado region in Mozambique, you know, whether it is the Central African Republic, Nigeria's northeast region, Cameroon's southwest region. These are, you know, places on the continent that have been experiencing one form of security challenge or the other. And today on The Square, we brought, you know, two experts to look and unpack it all with the sole aim of getting a solution. When we return, we'll be talking pretty much more about what this means, especially in Nigeria's northeast and a couple of other places on the continent. Stay with us. Well, in Nigeria's northeast region, for instance, Boko Haram has killed more than 1,000 people since 2020. Now, you also recall the very unfortunate incident of 2020 where farmers were slaughtered on rice fields, causing a rise in trepidation and fear across locals, many of whom are very significant to Nigeria's food production. Kidnapping has also become the order of the day in northern Nigeria, with the roads left unsafe, which has also caused a spike in air transportation in Nigeria. Other than insecurity faced in the form of arms, food insecurity is a core factor in the current state of the continent. In Mali, Burkina Faso, Chad, Niger, rebels are fighting tooth and nail to take center stage, and many citizens have fled their homes in search of somewhere safer. So in Cameroon, there is a twin challenge of secessionists in the south of the country and Boko Haram on his other side. The place of leadership can't be argued, as extreme poverty, lack of food, and unemployment have stayed as a fuel for Africa's worries and challenges. Of course, that's why we've come up with some of these concerns on The Square today. Now, let me start with Commodore Ayuba, and I hope we can get to you this time. In the Central African Republic, for instance, there are more than 850,000 refugees and almost 500,000 internally displaced persons in that part of the world. Tell us, if you will, what exactly the world is dealing with, especially the continent, knowing full well that this is a big humanitarian crisis on our hand.
Thank you very much, Sulai. I hope you can hear me better now.
Perfectly clear.
The real problems Africa is dealing with still remains the problem of greed of the political leadership, and as well as the elite group that are hell-bent on reaping the sole benefits of the wealth, common wealth of the African people. And of course, joined by their collaborators from outside the region, they've been benefiting from this process, especially with proliferation of small arms, which have helped them to perpetuate themselves in their various offices. Now, the impact of this on humanitarian affairs on humanity is huge. Congo is not at peace, so you have issues of problems. Even in Burundi, you find crisis all over the place in Uganda, political turmoil, and people keep moving across each other's borders. Same in Southern Sudan. All is not at peace. So the impact is on the world's, the United Nations and its agencies, and those donor nations, NGOs, that we have to bring monies and food supplies to Africa. Whereas Africa should be a net producer of food, capable of feeding the entire world. Unless these things are checked and we begin to take advantage of the African free trade agreements, we may be a long way yet from home in finding credible solutions to Africa's continuous crisis.
Well, anyway, we'll come back to you, Commodore Ayuba, but I want Kabir to weigh in on this. And specifically why I'll be coming back to you is because of your experience in the military. Kabir, time was when the continent, specifically, they come together to see how they can push out any kind of insurrection or security challenge. We recall what the Economic Community of West Africa did then by forming ECOMOG. And we have actually seen what AU, then the OAU, did to help, bring about peace and stability on the continent. Do you think that the continent still has that kind of, military muscle to help out in any region now that we have pockets of, troubles around?
So yes, at both the continental level, the AU, and then at the regional level, all the regional, multilateral arrangements have their different levels of peace and security platforms for intervention in their member states. But it's a matter of capacity. The economic circumstances of virtually all the countries has limited their capacity to be involved in such arrangements. But having said that, the continent still has presence in some hotspots, Mali as an example, Sudan as an example, and several other places where you have the continent's troops in different multilateral arrangements to support sometimes peacekeeping arrangements or more complicated deployments than that. So yes, the continent has that. There is also a disposition towards getting involved in new things. So as an example, the ECOWAS has come up with a framework on terrorism, and if I remember well, has set out a certain amount of money that its member states are supposed to contribute. And just yesterday or 2 days ago, Nigeria actually donated to that fund, I think about 80 million US dollars, if I'm right about that. I think the target is for about 100 billion. I can't remember exactly. So you've got those type of arrangements. You've got the expectations of these multilateral bodies, but the reality is that the capacity of the member states has been, reduced tremendously as a result of their economic challenges. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has also affected the economies of these countries and have now further reduced their capacity for those type of involvement.
Commodore Ayuba, time was when, we were talking about the capacity, which Kabir has also highlighted. Some of these African countries, Nigeria specifically, had had to spearhead some of them to see how they can return peace, stabilize, some of these trouble spots. Do you think, going by what we've seen in a pandemic here, and of course with Nigeria dealing with its own security challenges, especially in the area of Boko Haram and, banditry, can there be an end in sight into some of these challenges?
Oh, well, it's like the end is not near in sight. As you highlighted, the COVID-19 interventions have further restricted many nations from responding positively to conflict management, especially in Africa. Nigeria, being a leading contributor of troops for both at the sub-regional and regional levels, as well as the United Nations level, had to withdraw most of its forces to deal with the internal crisis in the Northeast, which is opening up to the Northwest, North Central, and of recent is beginning to show up in parts of the Southwest, South, and Southeast, which means that Nigeria may not have the capacity to contribute as much troops as it would have liked to do if otherwise our internal security situation was more tranquil. And here is where the dilemma is. It is doubtful Nigeria will play any major role in international peace and security other than to contribute some funds here and there, and a pocket of staff officers and in Mali, for instance, and in some parts of the UN forces. All the troops are being contributed by Nigeria, less than 300, 400 troops as it stands at the moment.
You know, quickly here, before we start talking about solutions, let's also ask the question about some form of sponsorship. Kabir, I want you on this. If the concern now is that there is a depletion in the resources and capacity of some of the African countries that would have, helped, stabilize or bring about peace across the region, shouldn't also the continent be asking the question from where do they get the resources to prosecute trouble on the continent?
If I get your question well, are you referring to the governments themselves or the non-state actors?
The non-state actors, because there must be some form of funding for the non-state actors.
Yes, so there are several theories that are out there. Some of them, of course, fall into the realm of conspiracy theories. So as an example, in Niger, because of its uranium deposit, some have the belief that it's Western countries that are trying to, as it were, influence the control of those deposits. Then even in the Lake Chad Basin, some conspiracy theories are suggesting that the reason for the presence of non-state actors, especially Boko Haram, is because of the oil deposits in the Lake Chad Basin, especially on the Nigerian part of it. So those kind of conspiracy theories are there. But beyond that, and I think that's something both myself and my co-discussant have mentioned, is the weaponization of these countries. Most of these weapons are not produced locally in Nigeria. They found their way here because there is a readily available market. Now, I agree with you. Who pays for these weapons? Now, for these non-state actors, there are two major theories that are out there. The predominant one says it is from the proceeds of their crime. So they engage in kidnap for ransom. The ransom is paid sometimes in huge sums, and then they use those ransoms to buy the weapons. The other theory is that they also get these weapons from the security agencies, the African country security agencies. In the case of Nigeria, in 2018 and 2019, we saw about 18 forward operating bases run down by these terrorist groups and their armories, raided, and a lot of weapons stolen from these armories by these groups. So it's neither here nor there. Yes, there are supplies from foreign sources, and it's very, very possible, even though there are no evidence suggesting or confirming this, but there are indications that there may be foreign influence in the activities of some of these non-state actors beyond what we are seeing as obvious. Of course, the reason may be resource control. Other reasons may be influence. Especially in the murky world of intelligence, you use a non-state actor to perpetrate an activity, and then you go behind as it were, to make your demand in order to have the kind of influence you want. So what I would say is very important for especially the African countries is to now do what most countries do, which is to determine their interest and then put forward that interest in the multilateral fora, so that irrespective of whatever the narrative behind the involvement of whether they are non-state actors from the foreign context or even states that are involved in this, once you have your interest determined and you are going about pursuing that interest, then the ability of these countries to detract you from meeting your goals and aspirations will be reduced, significantly.
We'll take a moment. When we come back, we'll allow Commodore Ayuba weigh in on this talk about sponsors of the bad guys on the continent, and pretty much more talk about solutions that are being put in place to get Africa safe. Stay with us.
My name is Nadia Nakai, and I'm a rapper that originates from South Africa.
Yo, my name is Deliver Julio.
Listening together with the B2C soldiers.
Kampala boys from Uganda.
Alors je souhaite bonne année.
We are Tara and Bella.
My name is Loco.
Shout out News Central.
À la chaîne News Central.
News Central, Africa first.
Africa first.
Keep watching News Central Africa first.
This is the beginning of a movement, a time that marks a turning point in African broadcasting. We refuse to be held back. We are taking our stories and sharing them in our voices. The world will hear Africa's true voice and follow her authentic story. Join us right here on News Central TV as we make history by telling stories that put Africa first.
Well, if you live on the continent, it sure will worry you, especially in Ethiopia's Tigray region, where more than 1 million people are still struggling to get AIDS. The Ethiopian Tigrayan crisis has taken center stage in the world, and it will be discussed at the UN General Assembly. Accusations of war crimes have been flying, with the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali accused of masterminding a genocide in the northernmost Tigray. Now, thousands have been killed since the conflict started in November, and despite Ethiopia claiming it has launched its final offensive, the offensives have hardly taken a backseat. Now, we're still, is our home stretch with Commodore Ayuba and Kabir Adamu. Now, the Ethiopian crisis, gentlemen, brings to the fore the issue of regional politics and its consequent challenges. What lessons can others learn from Ethiopia, Commodore Ayuba?
Thank you, Sulai. If you also look back to the fact that Ethiopia had resisted colonization over the years, and of course, with the split between Ethiopia and Eritrea, have begun to show signs of weakness in the ability, our capacity, the ability of Ethiopia to actually resist both internal and external intervention. As it were, the conflict that will have spurred Ethiopia back into a deep civil war has been managed by the ability and capacity of its armed forces to intervene and repel most of the actions of the rebel factions. So whatever it is, the situation is that it's manageable to the point that discussions can be held at the negotiation table. But African countries must also begin to understand, especially that the national interest of all the countries will be primus inter pares in dealing with the collective issues of security in Africa. And of course, the regional body must begin to be more assertive and do more than just mere judge, as it seems to be the trend in today's African Union politics.
Yeah, you know, Kabir, he used the word "jojo," and that's more like a conversation, more like a negotiation. And he's actually started it by saying that the continent must move, you know, with some bite and, you know, assertion to fixing this problem. Tell us, what should the African Union be doing at this point in time, as well as the regional bloc which you earlier mentioned, the ECOWAS?
If we are focusing on Ethiopia as an example, then the circumstances there are a bit complex in the sense that almost all the multilateral bodies have this overriding principle where they don't get involved in the internal affairs of their member states, except in certain circumstances where there is a breach of any of their protocols. So a coup, as an example, or what can be described as war crimes in certain instances. Now, the crisis in Ethiopia, to almost all intents and purposes, has been portrayed by the Ethiopian state to be an internal matter, despite the insistence of the Tigrayan people and forces that there was involvement of at least Eritrea and one or two other countries, so trying to make it an international crisis. I think the state, Ethiopia itself, has maintained that it's an internal matter. And you would recall that it stopped even the UN from accessing Tigray at a point until it achieved its purpose before it allowed that. So it's a bit complex because diplomacy has its own principles too, and those principles allow countries to exercise to a larger extent their autonomy. And so multilateral agencies are also restricted by these abilities. However, I do agree totally with my co-discussant. If the continent has embraced democracy and there are evidences that member states, for instance, are abusing any of the principles or tenets of democracy, then they should show some bite, because in the past, we've seen instances where certain member states have carried out conduct, unfortunately, that against the tenets and principles for which the continent stands, but we haven't seen that type of bite by the continent. A good example is, Uganda. In the recently concluded elections, we saw what happened there, how the opposition was suppressed, and several means that were not conventional introduced by the government to achieve its purpose. So those concerns are there. And despite the fact that the continent has invested heavily in building the capacity of the multilateral bodies, the AU as an example, and then over time, even the structure of the AU is being changed to allow this type of action. Unfortunately, we haven't seen enough of that going forward. Now, some have argued that it's because these are peers. They are at that level, they are mates, and so they don't want to create an antecedent or precedent that could be used against them in the future. And so they are reluctant sometimes to carry out such actions so that those precedents are not created that could turn out to also affect them in the future. But I think overriding principle is the continent, and more importantly, the people of the continent, where it is clear that the leadership has lost the support of his people, then if he fails to hear and listen to the voice of reason, then the continent owes it a duty to intervene. Because if they fail to intervene at that point, then what will likely happen is situations like that of Libya, where he or she will be forcibly ejected, and before you know it, the country degenerates into some form of civil war. And at that point, the continent has no choice but to intervene, and the intervention will be costly, depending on the circumstances of the country in question. So it's teaching time, as they say, saves 9.
Listening to both of you gentlemen, what comes to mind is the affluence, the abundance of natural resources on the continent. It then means that Africa has enough to help it, get out of any mess whatsoever. But, for some selfish interests, people are fighting over some of these natural resources. Take, for instance, the pain farmers have to go through. Commodore Ayuba, still in getting solutions, on this crisis on the continent. What can Africa do, especially to protect its farmers? Because if you attack that very fabric of the continent, it then means that the continent just might go into extinction if farmers are getting killed by the numbers. Are there ways, as we try to, proffer solutions to the crisis, to helping farmers stay safe?
Thank you very much, Sulai. The issue of protecting farmers, pastoralists, and all those responsible for production of food in Africa, that including Nigeria, is very, very paramount. And of course, we all understand that the law of armed conflict prohibits armed groups or armies from attacking defenseless civilians. So, as my co-discussion has said, there's a lot that governments must do at national, sub-regional, and regional level to ensure that measures are put in place, protecting farmers in conflict areas by ensuring that the sort of protection forces are put forward around those core areas where food production is key for Africa to realize its goals, especially with the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement to be realizable. Governments, especially at the level of the African Union, must now take decisive actions on how to do that. But that will depend on the capacity of each of these countries and their armed forces to mitigate conflict and also protect its citizenry.
Yeah, the whole, the dynamics of what we are witnessing on the continent brings to focus, the African people and how important it is for the African people to get, a peaceful continent. Now, Kabir, quickly, let's see how this ripple effect is affecting pretty much many other countries. Even, for instance, in Nigeria, we have seen how the crisis in the Northeast has also affected transportation business to the extent that air transportation is almost now for the super rich in Nigeria. So the economic aspect of crisis cannot be overemphasized. So tell us what other policies or tactics you think that the governments in the continent, more so especially your country, Nigeria, can put in place to get itself out of this big, imbroglio caused by Boko Haram and bandits?
The current focus of the world, Sule, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, I don't see any reason why African countries should not embrace this focus. Yes, we should have adapted to our own peculiar and cultural requirements. As an example, the LGBTQ demand, which is also covered under this diversity, it's not likely to fly in Africa, but at least all the other components of the diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think African countries should learn to embrace it. We've embraced democratic governance, virtually all the countries. And so the way to go is to enhance the democratic culture, allow democratic practices, especially at the political party level, where candidates who are more popular and whose political parties prefer are allowed to emerge. And then, of course, there are also a free and level playing ground is provided for contestation during electoral processes so that the most popular candidate emerges as the winner. Now that would reduce this high level of perception of marginalization that exists almost everywhere in Africa. And it will also mean the candidate who emerges is likely to listen more to the people because he knows he was elected by the people. And then the second point I would like to emphasize is the predominant disposition of African countries to rely on military strength as well as the other security agencies to solve challenges. Sometimes these challenges are not of a pure security nature. They have root causes, and so no matter the type of military effort you use, if you don't address those root challenges, and specifically in Nigeria, that's what we're seeing. We've been using military effort to address some of these concerns, but unfortunately, we're not solving them because we've not addressed the root causes. And we've mentioned some of the root causes at the beginning of this program: poverty, unemployment, name them, climate change, weapons proliferation. As long as you don't address this, no matter the type of military force and deployment you use, then you're not likely to see the effect. And then lastly, it's important that we take note of the activities of some of these both non-state actors, local and foreign, that unfortunately are sabotaging the efforts of governments in West Africa and other parts of the continent. And so when we're allowing them into the country, we should have some form of oversight and surveillance capabilities that would limit their capacity to introduce all of these elements that detract us from the objectives that we want to achieve. In other words, when you go to the table in the field of diplomacy, make sure that you have backdoor channels, which essentially means intelligence capabilities to understand what your partner is doing. Development partners, as an example, we allow them in under the guise of humanitarian or development aid, but then it's likely, just like we've seen when they attempted to arrest or kill Osama bin Laden. It was a health intervention project they used. So we're not even here in Africa. It's likely that those kind of things are happening, and so we should have the capacity and capability to monitor this type of activities and ensure that they are not being used for other purposes and objectives.
Commodore Ayuba, tell us if at this point in time some of these countries should be having what we call negotiation, coming on the table and having a conversation on how best to sheathe the sword.
Sulai, I totally agree with you that persistent conflict leads to weariness, and weariness leads to hopelessness. So there are mechanisms for conflict resolution in all the regional and sub-regional bodies, i.e. AU and ECOWAS. And therefore, And the UN also canvasses for pacific settlements of conflict. So it is important that leaders, heads of governments, politicians, look through that lens of negotiation as a means of reaching peaceful resolution. One particular issue is the ongoing issue in the Southwest, where today we are seeing the governors, 4 of them from the Southwest meeting, also with 2 governors from the North, on the issue of herdsmen, evacuation orders, and all the confusion. That effort is yielding positive results, as it were, rather than taking standpoints on who is right and who is wrong, who will blink first. So I think negotiation, pacific settlement is a credible way out. Either way, wars go on end. One day, we all have to settle down on the negotiation table with the huge losses, human, material, that must have taken place. Negotiation and pacific settlement it is. Thank you.
Well, you know, the critical beauty of Africa is its people, culture, character, charisma, and quality, just as we've seen in both of you. So, but in the absence of health, peace, and tranquility, all of these become less important. Africa must solve its security problems to see its people blossom and bloom. Talks are not yet ended just yet. Well, tomorrow we shall discuss Mozambique's pressure point in Cabo Delgado, the return of Sudan's Darfur troubles, Tunisians' protest, and that which Commodore Ayuba has just raised, the herdsmen issue in Nigeria, which is big at the moment. Thank you very much for being such nice company, gentlemen, for coming on the show. Stay with us, and don't forget you can watch us on youtube.com/News Central TV and on Star Times, channels 274. And it's Africa's Fest. I'm Sulaiman. I'll see you again tomorrow.